From a defabricated solar-powered garden shed in Rockland County, New York, USA, this is Stand Up with Pete Dominic. On today's episode, how to navigate American regulatory bureaucracy after you've just purchased yet another Bored Ape NFT. And now, the podcast host who has no need for bored apes because all of his money is hopefully real, Pete Dominic!
Oh, it is real. Piles of it. Mountains of money. I'm like Scrooge McDuck. It's all in gold coins. Thank you very much, Pico. And hello there, my friends, my people, my family. Welcome to today's episode of Stand Up, where I have two amazing women. Normally, I don't gender the women. I just try to say people. But these two are very powerful women who have done so much for other women that I'm going to refer to them as that. How about it? Dahlia Lithwick and Lizz Winstead, both joining me on one episode. I mean, separate conversations, but oh, is it good. What a big deal. What a big deal to get both of these ladies on the show, and I can't do it without your support, without your subscriptions, so please keep that train moving along and sign up now if you haven't. It is Thursday, which means one of the great benefits of membership here in our community is that we hang out. We're friends. We hang out on Thursday nights at a virtual Zoom. I've been doing it for, I think, over 3 years, and it is always, always great. So I'm looking forward to seeing you tonight. Maybe I'll invite some special guests. Anybody want to make a suggestion? Let me know, and I can reach out and invite some people who you might want to hear from. A couple things I wanted to mention before I get to my conversations. First with Dahlia, which begins at 12 minutes in, and then my conversation with Lizz Winstead starts at about 33 minutes. But first, just a couple emails on yesterday's program. First of all, Phil Round reached out in reference to my conversation with Michael Cohen on yesterday's show and said, listening to you and Michael Cohen on today's podcast, I'm struck with an inchoate sense that this country is being held together by a thread and that maybe Merrick Garland is convinced the thread will break if he does the right thing. Very critical of Garland, but perhaps the country is more far gone than even a cynical bastard like me realizes. Oh, I don't know about that, Phil. You may be right. You may be wrong, but we'll see what Merrick Garland does when Jack Smith probably, most likely, will refer charges to him at the Department of Justice. And I was talking to my friend Dustin yesterday, and a lot of people gave me feedback and love that we had Bruce Bartlett back on. And he said, I just love Bruce Bartlett. So many of you do, and I'll try to get him back on more often. I said, what is it about him? And he said, I don't know. I think it's how confident but not arrogant he is, and his sense of humor and delivery. And we'll just shit on people that need to be shit on, but so, like, dismissive of them at the same time. And it's just this, quote, this is how I am, better or worse. I do these dumb things. I probably shouldn't, but whatever. I'm fine with it. And then I just can't think of time when I've disagreed with Bruce Bartlett. But also, like, probably because I immediately assume he's right, maybe. And clearly passionate, but still stoic. A love letter to Bruce Bartlett from Dustin Barnett. Thank you, Dustin. That was great. I think you captured it just perfectly. All right, that's just a little bit of feedback on yesterday's show. And now it's time to get to yesterday's news. Of course, the big news yesterday was the failure to launch Ron DeSantis' Twitter announcement ended in disaster and mockery. It had all kinds of technical issues. Of course, it took place on Twitter's audio function platform called Spaces. And even Fox News went after it. Much hyped Ron DeSantis presidential announcement, a disaster on Twitter, amateur hour. That's what Fox News said about it. Jeff Charlotte says, I am so not enjoying watching DeSantis and Musk. I'm saving myself for Mencken and Mattson on Sunday. He, of course, is referring to the HBO hit show Succession. Are you watching it? Wajad Ali says, so many Republicans are so desperate to make Ron DeSantis into a thing. He's like their invisible cola or their Quibi or Max. He's a wet noodle. He doesn't have it. Just wait until he gets under the national spotlight and gets grilled. Jared Yates Sexton says, Twitter not being ready for a major event and then crashing every time Musk says it's ready is just incredible stuff. Incredible. There's literally no difference between an episode of Alex Jones' InfoWars and this Twitter Spaces event between Elon Musk and Ron DeSantis. Same framework, same phrases and arguments. This is a through-the-looking-glass moment. On today's show, I've got Lizz Winstead. She tweeted, DeSantis is going to have to live with electile dysfunction jokes for the rest of his life, because it didn't work. Mehdi Hassan tweeted, congratulations to DeSantis' crack comms team for organizing a totally effective and non-humiliating campaign launch for their boss with tech genius Elon Musk. Bravo. Remember, their pitch is Trump, but competent. LOL. Jordan Ohl, Ron DeSantis' Twitter Spaces campaign launch has so far featured several minutes of silence, random throat clearing, muffled commentary from Elon Musk about why Spaces isn't working, hosts, including DeSantis, disappearing. Great start to the campaign. And Joe Biden was trolling Elon Musk and Ron DeSantis in real time when he tweeted, "This link works," and linked to a website that you can donate to reelect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And he also released a new ad making fun of Ron DeSantis for his disastrous campaign launch in like real time. Pretty impressive stuff from the Biden-Harris team. I'm sure everybody has reactions to that disastrous launch for Ron DeSantis on Twitter with Elon Musk. I hope to hear from you at tonight's Hangout or before. Email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. All right, what else did I want to tell you? Of course, the legend Tina Turner passed away yesterday at the age of 84. What can I say? Nothing, really, other than go read all of the amazing things being said about Tina Turner by the people who knew her and revered her the most. I mean, I never really have a lot to say about amazing musicians, but the entire world obviously reacted to her passing. President Biden, Mick Jagger, Oprah, Barack Obama, Questlove, Diana Ross, Brian Wilson, and so many more. Angela Bassett, who memorably earned an Oscar nomination, I should say, for playing Tina Turner and What's Love Got to Do with It, shared a lengthy statement with Deadline.com, which reads in part, her final words to me, for me, were, "You never mimicked me. Instead, you reached deep into your soul, found your inner Tina, and showed her to the world. I shall hold these words close to my heart for the rest of my days. I am honored to have known Tina Turner." Questlove was a little more lyrical, sharing these thoughts on Facebook. Survivor, the king and queen. She was everything. I was not prepared to say goodbye to Tina Turner. But it's 2023, and here we are. What an amazing life. Love you forever, Tina Turner. Rest in melody. A tribute from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame read in part, Tina Turner worked hard to reimagine the role of a black woman in rock and roll, one that was firmly placed front and center. John Fogerty, the former Creedence Clearwater Revival frontman, wrote, "Proud Mary," tweeted, "So deeply sad to hear about Tina Turner's passing. I loved her version of Proud Mary. It was different and fantastic. I was also so happy because she chose my song and it was her breakthrough record." And there's just so much more to say, of course, and I'm sure you have thoughts and feelings, and we'll remember her at the Hangout tonight with some of her music, and if anybody has any connections to her or meaningful things to say, I would certainly love to hear from you. And the other really big story that affects everybody is the big looming deadline on the debt ceiling. The negotiations continued as the deadline looms. No deal yet as of Wednesday night. House Speaker, an empty barrel of a man, Kevin McCarthy, sounded slightly more positive on Wednesday after negotiators left the White House after the latest round of debt ceiling talks. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said she will try to be more precise about when the nation can start missing payments in her next advisory to Congress. U.S. stocks fell more than 250 points Wednesday as Wall Street appeared to be waking up to the possibility of a default. But prospects are grim for passing the debt limit hike by June 1st, according to Republican sources to CNN. So it's really hard to say what's going to happen. I don't want to speculate on it too much because it's going to develop quickly. It's just such an unbelievable shame and self-inflicted wound by Republicans. It's hard to imagine how any conservative Republicans can support this. I guess they just don't understand what's at stake or how this debt got created by Republicans themselves. At least that's my take. Target pulled some LGBTQ-themed merchandise following threats impacting our team members, they said, which I haven't really followed that story, but that was a pretty big deal I saw trending yesterday. The South Carolina Senate passed a ban on abortion after 6 weeks of pregnancy. A Florida elementary school restricted access to the poem recited at Biden's 2020 presidential inauguration after one parent complained, and school review, that's Amanda Gorman. Also, House Republicans are voting on a measure to block Biden's student loan forgiveness program. And Democrats laughed at Marjorie Taylor Greene when she asked them to abide by decorum while she was presiding over the House. I thought this was pretty good.
The The members are reminded to abide by decorum of the House.
Oh, God, her voice and the House floor is just too much to have her presiding over the House. So let's move on. How about this? Some good news. A paralyzed man can walk naturally again with brain and spine implants. I like this. Guy was living in China. His name is Gert Jan Oskam. In 2011, he was in a motorcycle accident, left him paralyzed from the hips down. Now, with the combination of devices, scientists have given him control over his lower body again, which is pretty amazing. Good news. And I think that's where I'll end the news on, because I'm having a hard time focusing tonight. I got a lot of stuff going on that I'm trying to keep track of, that I'm trying to manage, and so it makes it a little harder to do the opening of the show. So I'm going to punch out, get to my amazing guests. How about that? Two awesome conversations coming your way. Lizz Winstead and Dahlia Lithwick on one show. Does it get any better? Man, both these conversations are really great. Both these women are so accomplished, so impressive, and I'm so flattered that they agreed to join me. So let's get after it now, and I hope to see you at tonight's hangout. First, Dahlia Lithwick, of course, writes about the courts and the law for Slate, where she also hosts the podcast Amicus. You should absolutely go listen to the conversation that we talk about that she had with E. Jean Carroll and her amazing lawyer, Robbie Kaplan. Her book is amazing as well. You got to get her book. If you haven't already bought Lady Justice, Women, the Law, and the Battle to Save America, you should own that book for sure. Follow her on Twitter and thank her for joining me here on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, the amazing, luminous, ingenious, original, and very funny, by the way, Dahlia Lithwick.
Yay! There she is, one of my all-time favorite people to talk to. And I don't say that to everybody. Dahlia Lithwick, hi.
Hi.
I mean, I say it to Eric Siegel sometimes, but...
Tell Eric I say hi.
I will do that. That's a callback from our conversation before I hit record. Always a weird thing. Okay. I have a lot to talk with you about. I'm really happy that you're able to talk to me. First of all, I think you've done one of your very best episodes of your podcast, Amicus, with E. Jean Carroll and Robbie Kaplan, who, of course, you featured her in your amazing book. And I think that's the first place I really heard about her. Tell me about these two and why what they're doing together matters so much.
I mean, Robbie Kaplan, I've known for a long time. And, you know, she sort of is Supreme Court famous because she argued the Edie Windsor case, which was the case that at the end of the day got rid of the Defense of Marriage Act, which was the precursor to getting us to Obergefell and marriage equality in this country. And, you know, that in and of itself was heroic because she took that case all the way to the Supreme Court. Folks who don't know the inner workings of the Supreme Court know that by the time you're at the U.S. Supreme Court, somebody else is generally telling you not to argue your own case, even if you've had it all the way from the lower courts, because there's just a handful of Harlem Globetrotters who do all the oral arguments at the court. But Robbie did it, and she won it, and she essentially said the line that Justice Kennedy used in his opinion about how time blinds us to justice, to inequality, and to dignity. So, like, were Robbie Kaplan to have stopped there and just, you know, taken up weaving, it would have been enough. But she was also the person, and this is how she made her way into my book, who, when the white supremacists and Nazis invaded Charlottesville in 2017, and it was very, very clear that the Jeff Sessions Justice Department was not going to do anything about it as an incident of race hatred. Robbie just kind of helicoptered in with Karen Dunn and brought the civil lawsuit that brought all of the white supremacists and Nazis and Klansmen and Proud Boys to justice. That, too, could have really been enough. At that point, she really could have just taken off and gone to an island and drank mojitos. But instead, she comes roaring out and does the E. Jean Carroll defamation lawsuit, which is essentially the lawsuit that, a week and a bit ago ended in this massive, massive judgment, $5 million from a unanimous jury, finding that Donald Trump had committed sexual abuse of E. Jean Carroll, but also had defamed her.
Right.
And so Robbie Kaplan is, in some sense, I used to call her, the Attorney General of the resistance, but she's just one of those people who, when there's no grown up in the room, Robbie just says, okay, I guess I'll do it.
She's amazing. And obviously, so is E. Jean Carroll. Why was E. Jean Carroll the right person for this horrible situation and case?
So, E. Jean is an amazing character. For folks who don't know the backstory, she was a kind of legendary gonzo journalist, in the 80s and 90s. She had this amazing Ask E. Jean column that a lot of women my age grew up reading. That was the advice column. And Donald Trump allegedly came up to her in Bergdorf Goodman in the 90s, kind of assaulted her in a change room, and she said nothing about it for a very long time until after the advent of the Me Too movement. And I know you and I have talked about that a lot. She wrote a book, and one of the chapters of the book, and it was about men who'd been bastards to her, and one of her chapters really detailed this incident, and Donald Trump's response was to defame her, was to go after her. And she suffered massive professional consequences. She was let go. She suffered incredible sort of public opprobrium, and people went after her. And so Robbie said, you know what, let's sue the president for defamation. There's two parts of this lawsuit. It's a little bit technical. One of them is still hung up in a question because it was defamation that Donald Trump committed while he was the president.
Right.
That one is still pending. That's called Carroll 1. Carroll 2 was the suit that came after Trump had stepped down and defamed her again. That was the one that prevailed in a courtroom in Manhattan. One other thing I want to say, connecting Robbie and E. Jean, that I only know because Robbie's wife mentioned it to me, and I think it's so beautiful, Pete. Both Edie Windsor, who was, decades older than Robbie Kaplan, and E. Jean Carroll, who is significantly older than Robbie Kaplan, are her plaintiffs in a world in which, as Robbie's wife, Rachel, said to me last week, Robbie listens to older women. She listens to women who are in their 60s and 70s and 80s who are maybe invisible, and she vindicates their rights. And I love that as a theme here, that even E. Jean Carroll, who's in her 70s, even Edie Windsor, who had been married for decades and was being insulted by federal statutes that didn't recognize her marriage, that nobody sees them sometimes and nobody hears them. And then Robbie Kaplan steps in. And I just think that's such a beautiful theme for this moment, because Donald Trump, as you know from the E. Jean Carroll deposition, confused Marla Maples, his wife, with E. Jean Carroll in a photograph because all women look the same.
Unbelievable moment. I've watched that moment in that deposition several times and really enjoyed it. It's a great point about the wisdom of older women. We always think about wisdom of older men, and they always get heard, their wisdom. But when I think about the wisdom of older women, American women, I think a lot about how they lived through the time when abortion was illegal. And even conservative Republican women don't want to go back there often. And yet here we are, a great time to listen to the wisdom of older women on this issue. So where do you see where we are at on this in this country? It seems to be, I just talked to the great Lizz Winstead, who's obviously an activist and constantly following this. Where are the courts on this? What's next? Are they coming for IVF, for birth control, for mifepristone? Where do you see this headed next with this conservative court?
We're just in an inexplicable legal moment where it is abundantly clear that every piece of data we have after the Dobbs ruling came down, whether it's all of those state referenda and ballot initiatives, whether it was the special election in Wisconsin for a Supreme Court justice, which was a blowout for the justice who promised to protect reproductive rights, or whether it was the midterms, it is clear the electorate hates Dobbs and hates the idea of these hyper draconian bills that are, 6-week bans, 15-week bans, no exceptions. We hear, and here I have to just say I'm impressed. Day after day after day, there's a story in the mainstream press of somebody who has been left to bleed out, left to go septic in a parking lot. These extraordinary women in Texas, in Florida, who are telling their stories and saying, I was forced to carry a pregnancy that almost killed me, that was not viable because of Dobbs. And so it has been a daily story. And in the face of that, state legislatures passing more and more and more punitive and draconian bans. I'll just say this week, in case people aren't clocking it, we have a young teenager in Nebraska who's pled guilty to terminating her pregnancy, and her mom, they communicated by way of social media to get abortion medication. Her mom is now subject to years in prison. So this is happening every day. And yet state legislatures, in the face of that, just keep pushing these bans. So I am mystified. I don't understand. And we have Ron DeSantis running for president, thinking that the thing that's going to make him super popular is being ever more punitive and cruel. And maybe just to answer your initial question, so many of the courts seem on board with that. And so we've got this Fifth Circuit panel that's deciding the medication abortion case that was stayed by the U.S. Supreme Court. Arguments in that panel last week were shocking in terms of the unwillingness to understand the human cost of doing away with mifepristone.
The justices on the Fifth Circuit unwilling to understand.
Yes, the 3 judges hearing the case who were more upset that the Biden Justice Department hurt the feelings of Judge Kaczmarek, the district court judge who tried to enjoin the abortion pill nationwide. And they were very upset at the language. That seemed to be the gist of it. So I think we're just in a collision course. I think we're in a collision course between public will and what an electorate that is allowed to vote wants to express, and these just highly gerrymandered red states and highly gerrymandered in different ways, federal and state courts that don't care.
Yeah.
And really the only question is, do we manage to allow democracy and voting to break through and fix that? Or are they poised to just so profoundly suppress democracy that it doesn't matter what the public wants? And that's where we are.
Yeah. When it comes to the health of democracy, a lot of people are worried about this case that the Supreme Court shouldn't still be looking at. Apparently, it's hard to understand how jurisdictions work, but the most important case, it would seem, would be Moore v. Harper, this case that has the independent state legislature out of North Carolina. Do you think that anything's going to happen with that, or are they going to decide they don't have any standing, like a lot of people are arguing, and that this case is going to be seen as moot? I guess that's the word.
Yeah, I mean, this case is thermonuclear. It was when the court decided to hear it. It still is. And in very, very brief, it's a case that for the first time raises the proposition that state legislatures have plenary, which means completely unchecked power to do what they want with election practices, and that state Supreme Courts have no jurisdiction to overturn them. And this is just a complete crack up, because very recently, when the Supreme Court got out of the gerrymandering cases business, one of the things they said was, it's fine, state Supreme Courts can handle this. So for the Supreme Court to say, now your state Supreme Court will manage it, and then only a few years later to have state Supreme Courts told that they are also benched, that's the case. And in some sense, it would give state legislatures in these gerrymandered red states absolute, complete power over how elections go. And in the most extreme iteration of this case, it's a little bit edging up on what John Eastman was asking the Trump White House to push for, which is, send us your fake electors. All that matters is what the legislature says.
Yeah.
You're quite right. Because the North Carolina Supreme Court turned over, this case is now in some sense moot because the gerrymander itself is not problematic. The Supreme Court has asked for supplemental briefing in this case. And I think you're also right that the court may kick it away. Even before that happened, even before this mootness issue, it was clear from arguments at the court that they were not super psyched about doing something so utterly insane and without doctrinal basis, even if it didn't go away. So my best guess is this may not get decided by this court this term, but the idea that the court ever granted this case, as you say, is in and of itself preposterous.
I have to ask you, Dahlia, about Judge Gorsuch. He added a statement, which I guess is not really a common thing, to the Mayorkas v. Who is it? The case about Title 42, which dispensed of the immigration restrictions v. COVID. And this is getting a lot of attention, the statement that Gorsuch claimed that COVID public health measures may have been the greatest peacetime intrusions on civil liberties in American history. And obviously, a lot of people are reacting. Maybe he should get a history book to talk about the civil liberties against Japanese Americans, or maybe slavery or Jim Nonetheless, what do you make of Judge Gorsuch's comments that civil liberties have been infringed at a rate? He says executive officials across the country issued emergency decrees on a breathtaking scale, and governors and local leaders imposed lockdown orders, forcing people to remain in their homes. They shuttered businesses and schools, and he went on and on. And this statement is getting a lot of attention as to what Gorsuch said about these COVID restrictions. What do you make of it?
I mean, I would commend to people, Jamel Bowie had an amazing piece about it in the Times. Mark Stern had a great piece about it in Slate. You're exactly right. Apparently, Justice Gorsuch never heard of slavery, never heard of Jim Crow, never heard of the Japanese internment or the treatment of Native Americans in this country, every one of whom is a peacetime incursion on human liberty and dignity in many orders of magnitude worse than being asked to wear a mask. But I think two things are going on. One, we know Justice Gorsuch was one of the people who was affronted at the ways in which the early lockdown directives offended religious groups who wanted to be able to gather without constraint. And he was one of the people who felt that that was an incursion on religious liberty. But more pointedly, and I think this goes to sort of bigger themes in the Supreme Court this year, Justice Gorsuch will never miss an opportunity to trash the administrative state. He will never miss an opportunity to say that all those government lawyers who are deciding your school policies, who are deciding your health policies, who are deciding environmental policies, they're all bad. It's a part of the conservative legal movement's larger project to dismantle the administrative state as we know it, to kind of do away with the regulatory state. All you need to do is go back and read his majority opinion in last year's case about Coach Kennedy, the praying coach on the 50-yard line, and the ways in which he trashes school attorneys who are just trying to accommodate the religious liberty interests of a coach, and the demand, the directive that schools not impose, public schools not impose religion on students. And he talks about it as though these people are these mustache twisting, evil gremlins who want to do nothing but oppress religious actors. And I think this is of a piece with this larger assault, whether it's the major questions doctrine, whether it's the Chevron doctrine. It is a massive attempt by the conservative legal movement to do the thing that in some sense the GOP has been doing for years, which is to say every single actor in the federal administrative state is a bad actor. Every person who regulates guns is lying. Every person who regulates health is a crook. Every single person whose work is to try to figure out how to make a big, complicated country run is in bad faith. And Justice Gorsuch is chef's kiss, loves to perform that better than anyone.
Well, at least he has a soft spot for Native Americans for some weird reason.
Sometimes.
So Slate is doing this really great series, week-long series, Disorder in the Court. You've been writing, you've contributed a couple pieces to this. But one, issue is how the court has been covered for years and treated differently, the judicial branch than the executive or legislative branch by reporters. What do you tell me a little bit about that piece? Because as it relates to this issue with Harlan Crow and Justice Thomas, much less Ginny Thomas, like we're learning way too much from investigative organizations like ProPublica or Publica, however it's pronounced, and not enough from, journalists who should be on the court beat, the Supreme Court beat. Like, how are we learning these things now? And how is it the journalism been broken in terms of, I think, covering the Supreme Court, or why?
I think that for all of the best reasons, Supreme Court coverage, including by me for many years, was more interested in the shifts in doctrine than in the institution itself. I think we just imputed good faith and good behavior to the justices long after it wasn't in evidence. We just took the position that our job was to translate what happened in that First Amendment case for readers, and some other entity was going to cover the court as a political branch. The best example I can give of this, Pete, is that I sat through a lot of confirmation hearings. Almost all of them are peopled by political reporters, Supreme Court confirmation hearings, because those are political events. Supreme Court reporters step in once you're on the bench and you're wearing a black robe. And then I think it's just very easy, if you have that sort of imaginary wall of separation, to say that all of the justices are just brains in vats. And what we're interested in doing is charting the course of the law. And part of the reason I wrote this piece is that I was deeply, deeply embarrassed when, as you say, ProPublica and Politico and the New York Times and every single mainstream media entity was breaking stories about things that happened on our beat, and things that happened in our beat in 2011 and 2012 and 2017 that we just thought, that's for someone else to cover. And so I don't want this to be me maligning myself or the Supreme Court press corps. I think we are very academic at heart. But what has happened in that void when nobody was covering the court as a completely partisan, bought and sold political institution is the stuff we are now seeing now with Harlan Crow, with Ginny Thomas messaging Mark Meadows, with payments from Leonard Leo that go through Kellyanne Conway into Ginny Thomas's pocket. Like, all that happened on my beat.
Yeah.
And I didn't think it was my beat.
Well, are you going to change your style?
This whole package that we've put together this week has been an effort to say there's a bunch of things we need to do. We need to sort of widen the aperture and look more closely. And I also really want to say, like, from the bottom of my heart to the investigative reporters at ProPublica and Politico and the people who have added this to their beat. And I noted in my piece that a whole bunch of new jobs are being posted for people to come in and scrape data and look at papers and figure out the Supreme Court. I think, like, let 1,000 flowers bloom. We all need to be doing this work, but holy cow, we are at like 1 minute before 12 on the Supreme Court legitimacy doomsday clock. And the fact that we're only starting to think about, maybe this is a partisan institution as designed is very chilling.
Better late than never.
Amen.
Thank you very much for joining me. You are indispensable. I really appreciate all of what you're doing, and I hope to talk to you soon. Have a good time at the DC event tonight. That sounds like a lot of fun. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, yeah, Dahlia Lithwick, the best. She is the best, simply the best. Sorry, Tina Turner. Just a little bit of a tribute to both Tina and Dahlia. No, I should stop talking. I can't stop talking. It's a podcast. All right, here we go. I am also very, very excited. Please go thank Dahlia, by the way. Go on Twitter and thank Dahlia for joining me. And go watch that conversation on YouTube, youtube.com/Stand Up with Pete. Go subscribe to that. You can also see my conversation with Lizz Winstead. I'm going to try to drop as many of them as I can on YouTube as well as here on the podcast. So go subscribe to the channel, youtube.com/Stand Up with Pete. It's free. Go do it now. Okay, now it's time to get to the great Lizz Winstead. What can I say? She's the co-creator of The Daily Show. She is behind the Abortion Access Front, amazing activism group. She is the host of Feminist Buzzkills, which is a great podcast. Of course, follow her on Twitter at Lizz Winstead. It is so great to catch up with Lizz. It's been way too long. So let's do it right now.
Oh, it's been way too long, but there she is, Lizz Winstead, one of my favorites.
You've been avoiding me.
Nope.
You never return my calls.
Nope.
I call you. I outside your door. I peed on the lawn of your terrible neighbor. Yes. Nothing. Nothing.
Oh, that was you. If I had known that was you, I reached out to you when you made your triumphant return to The Daily Show. I'm sure a billion people did. I was the last, I checked the email, to correspond. You have the red carpet, the open archway to you, my queen, your highness, Lizz Winstead. It's very good to see you back here. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I'm so glad to blab with you.
Yeah, there's just it's always so easy to talk with you, and I love to talk with you about anything. I love just having you in my space. I love watching you do stuff and things, and you've been doing a lot of stuff and things and a lot of really important work. But I do want to ask you, what was it like to be back on The Daily Show after all of the drama, all of the disrespect over the years? You made your triumphant return with your friend Sarah Silverman. I was just so happy. I hope you are have closure and feel happy about how that went.
Oh, it was great. Thanks to Sarah, 20 years later, I went back on the show and it was really cool. It was really nice to be in that. I mean, I wasn't even in that studio. That's a new studio. So it was fun. It was great to also just sort of come full circle on, knowing that using humor to expose hypocrisy is a game that I'm pretty good at. And in that format, we really made it work. And so to be able to take all of that knowledge and skill and then focus it and combine it in abortion activism is pretty cool. And then to be able to tell the story of how I did it and how people can follow me now and what I'm doing was really fun. But you got to cram a bunch of shit in 5 minutes.
You did a great job. Was it the platform you were expecting? Did you get a lot of attention after that appearance? It's a young demographic, I'm guessing, that watches that.
Yeah. I mean, we raised a shit ton of money. Right. We got a bunch of really young signups. Right. And I was surprised. I felt kind of bad because I was like, oh my God, Sarah, I'm your first guest when you're guest hosting. You could have anybody. And I was humbled and excited that the audience was thrilled, acted like they were thrilled that I was there. They stood up, they were clapping. It was fun. But the thing that I found the most interesting was I heard from most people afterwards. And so when we look at the trajectory of how The Daily Show has evolved and how people consume The Daily Show, it was so much watched you in the morning, watched a clip, saw your clips. So it wasn't like a shit ton of people watching instantly or so that were responding to me.
Well, I think I always try to make that point when people say that, a CNN or anybody's ratings are lower or whatever. I'm like, those ratings are only based on who's watching at the time when most people don't watch away. The vast majority of people probably even watch on clips, much less on delay or something, which I'm not sure they measure. So that's great. Well, I'm glad to hear that.
It was really fun. It was nice to just see there was there's some old guard folks still there. It was great, and Sarah was great. And then we ended up going out on tour together for 5 dates after that. And she really had enough of me in the whole month.
What were those audiences like?
Incredibly smart and fun. Yeah. It was really great. And so, and then we also got to have a table, Abortion Access Front had information and all kinds of shit. So her audiences are really smart.
Oh, that's awesome. So you're doing these big venues with Sarah, and out front, you're also recruiting new people to support the cause. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
I never stop. Come on.
No,
come on.
I was thinking about that right before we hit record. I was thinking about my life versus your life. I was like, I wonder, what her work is like and her life is like and her balance is like, but she's been basically doing activism for a long time, over 10 years. How long? I mean, would you say that you've been doing this kind of activism? Basically, I'll call it women's reproductive rights, much less abortion access, if we want to get more specific.
I mean, I would say I've been doing activism since the early 1990s. The sort of laser focus, because, I launched Dear America Radio. Yeah. I was doing all kinds of shit, in sort of generalized fuck the man kind of politics. And then, slowly it dawned on me how little I was talking about the thing that is the most important to me, and how little, let's be clear, progressive spaces wanted to hear about it even, right? It's a wedge issue. Do men want to hear about it? It's like, I hear about men shit all the time. I would hope so. It's about human rights, right? And so I think the reason that I slid so hard into it, and like you said, since about 2011 is when I really shift that into that dynamic of reproductive rights, was when no one else was doing it. When Wendy Davis stood on the floor of the Texas State House in those sneakers and filibustered for 13 hours, and it wasn't on the news, it was streaming on Twitter, which is where I watched it. Some small Texas activist was watching it and said, this is on, and I found it. And then I started live tweeting it. And that was the power of Twitter, right? You would live tweet an event that the media was ignoring. You could help get it trending. And then the corporate media started watching the trends. Yeah. And then all of a sudden they started carrying it, right? And so that's the power of, the internet and how you can use social media to help prioritize corporate media, help prioritize people. But the thing is, and the thing that always bugged me was I would blab on and on and on and drop the facts and do all the shit and be some kind of anger fluffer. And I didn't have anybody. And then people were like, well, what do I do? And I was like, donate. That's not interesting. Tell, donate, whatever. So then I was like, I want to have a component when people ask that question that I can answer it. Right. So that's why I started the org, to be able to say, here's hilarious ways we're dragging these people for filth. We're dropping some facts. We're, just like bringing people out of the shadows and into the light, and then hopefully into the gutter. And then it's like, okay, I did that. Now what? It's like, now what? Here's a list of things. So that's the part that's, I think, the most fun, is having a complete package.
And you've brought in so many and such a diverse group of young women, feminists, and people who know their shit, legal people, activists, black and white, everything else, and done it's such a really interesting organization. I also love the podcast. Really good. You have real smart, funny people. Feminist Buzzkills Live. You'll love that podcast. Go subscribe to it. Go listen to it. I've been listening to it lately because I wanted to talk to Liz and I wanted to know what I was talking about. And it's really good. And you're doing live dates in New York on June 7th. Yep. And then you're going to be down in Atlanta, where I know there's a lot of folks that listen to this show on, was it July 20th, I think?
Yeah, July 20th at Terminal West in Atlanta. It's like the pod is great because, first of all, we're the only pod about reproductive rights that's done by people who are on the ground.
Yeah.
So our guests are the doctors, the activists, patients, researchers. When you watch sometimes cable news, you'll see people who are talking about the horse race, or you'll see like legal analysis. And we have some of that too. But really, when you hear from the people who are providing the care and the people who are funding poor folks just trying to get there, it really helps you understand what the landscape really means. We get to do a podcast that follows the trends of what it means for all these fucking laws that are saying, yeah, we have a health of the mother exceptions, but you have to be dying in front of us for us to actually do the abortion. And the stories of people who have literally stood in the parking lot of a hospital waiting to hemorrhage because they've been excused because they haven't started hemorrhaging yet. Like, that's not a joke. And so to be able to hear those, to bring those stories, and then to bring the outrage. And then we also love to have comics on to bring a little light at the end of the tunnel. Sometimes comedians have the best takes on what's going on in current events, but you'll get a lot of info because the media can't cover it all. So we decided to.
Yeah, I think that what you're saying about when the Supreme Court makes a decision, it's kind of abstract for most people. I mean, it doesn't directly affect a lot of people. Many of these big decisions, whether it be on gay marriage or even Obamacare, much less women's reproductive rights. And so you don't really see the effect that the decisions have. But what you're doing with the podcast and what you've always been doing with your work is showing, as you called it, a landscape of people from the physicians and the actual patients to anywhere in between, everybody else, and how this is actually playing out, which is what I want to ask you. Since Roe v. Wade got struck down, we have seen so many state houses pass new laws. You've been covering this from the beginning and before. What do you want to tell everybody? Like, take me through what you have seen? I know you could talk for probably 2 hours because there's been so many changes in so many states, but what are some of those stories that you've been telling, that you've heard, that you're seeing now as a result of these just punitive, medieval, horrible laws being upheld?
Well, I think the thing that we saw instantly is the second that a lot of these really hostile states were planning way ahead.
Yeah.
And, people who didn't pay attention didn't understand that a lot of states had these draconian laws on the books, like we saw in Wisconsin, and a law from 1858 is literally has shut down all of the clinics. And the people of Wisconsin, just elected a state Supreme Court justice. And I think they're going to finally overturn that.
Yeah.
Michigan, that's happening all over the place. So when Roe v. Wade was overturned, 13 states ended abortion immediately. They had something called a trigger law on the books, which said if Roe v. Wade is closed, we close our doors. What that did in one day was put 35 million women of reproductive age living in a state where there is no access to abortion. And that was jarring in and of itself, right? Because people were unprepared, because no one was really talking about it in a way that it needed to be talked about. People told us we were hysterical when we said they're going to overturn Roe. And so what we have seen is a steady stream of desperation trying to get the care they need. People traveling 30%, just to give you an example, I live part of the year in Minnesota and part of the year in New York. 30% of all the abortions performed in the state of Minnesota are people from Texas every year.
Wow.
30%. So people are traveling. That's how far it takes for you to get an appointment, because there's backups in the states that are still offering it. We've gone into these draconian, if it's not totally banned, there's a 6-week ban. And for those of you that maybe need a little lesson on how pregnancy works, a 6-week ban is really a 2-week ban, because you have to miss your period once to figure out that maybe you're pregnant, and that's 4 weeks. And then you have 2 weeks to decide. And
I don't think they took that into consideration when they wrote that law.
They don't take anything into consideration, I think, Pete.
I don't think they were thinking about women I don't think they were thinking about women.
I don't either. And I think
or care about them very much also, maybe.
Well, it's also too, anytime that you're giving a fetus rights, you're taking away rights from the person who's pregnant. That's just true. So you're stripping that away, right? But also, I don't think they really thought about too, if they really cared about ending abortion, which they obviously don't, they care about control. They would be much more interested in making sure that they have a reality check on people like sex. Turns out they like to have sex. And so making it any kind of pregnancy prevention available and education available would take the amount of abortions out of the equation. We're always going to need abortion. I want to be really clear on that. I also want to be really clear that adoption isn't the alternative to abortion, because no one owes you anything from their body. Adoption is the alternative to parenting, and abortion is the alternative to giving birth. So, that's kind of just a little bit of a reframe.
Yeah, no, I think that's an interesting way of saying it. Yeah, yeah.
And so we're hearing a lot of people who are having abortions now later in pregnancy because it's taking them so long to find a place, which costs them more, it's just grave risk. People don't think about how cruel it is to put somebody through the rigors of staying pregnant if you have a pregnancy that's incompatible with life. Doctors are terrified to perform life-saving abortions because the laws are so muddy. And to quote Adam Serwer, the cruelty is the point.
Yeah.
The confusion is the point. The chilling effect is the point. There's physicians who are fleeing states. There's med schools who are seeing enrollment plummet. There's students who are leaving. There's whole OBGYN departments in Idaho and other states that have just shut down in hospitals because they can't do their jobs. And that's what we're facing. We're facing a crisis of caring about whether or not people will live or die, and making people continue horrifying pregnancies, making people continue pregnancies at all. And I just want to be super clear too, as Republicans are seeing, the fruits of their labor rotting and the public viewing it as rotting fruit, as they present this consensus, and I'm quoting all over the place if you're listening, 12 weeks seems to be a place where I feel comfortable landing. Why? What does that mean? Because if you are a person who thinks that there is some point that you get to decide what someone else does with their body, then that you are no longer saying that person's human. If you actually think, whether it's 6 weeks or 12 weeks, so I don't give a fuck what week, people need abortions throughout the course of their pregnancies for the reason that they and their doctor, or they and whomever have decided. And for someone else to decide there's a arbitrary blanket time that government intervention is okay between your skin and the rest of yourself, that's not cool. That's chattel. That's creating chattel culture for people who can be pregnant. And that should terrify everyone.
Well, it doesn't terrify everyone. That's for damn sure, unfortunately. Yeah. What do you say to the women who are part of the anti-abortion movement? And there sure is a lot of them in powerful positions, including, I think, Senator Josh Hawley's wife.
Amy Hawley. She was the attorney in this.
Is it Erin?
Erin Hawley.
Yeah.
Yeah. What did I say? Amy?
Doesn't matter, but yeah, her name is Erin.
Yeah, good old Erin Hawley. She will rush to any lawsuit that will oppress women. What I say is, if you want to understand how intoxicating and how deep white supremacy goes, these people are benefiting from a system and have chosen to, instead of buck the system, decided to take comfort in it. And it's really horrifying. It's about the most horrifying. And so to have Erin Hawley, Josh Hawley's wife, she's already made one horrible life decision, letting that man soil her. You'd think she'd be the first one to be like, birth control, abortion all day because I'm fucking Josh Hawley. But no, for her to be the lawyer in this medication abortion case that we've all been hearing about, and I listened to the oral arguments that she presented, it was profoundly disappointing for her to literally, and this is wild, so I'm sure your listeners have been seeing the basics of this case, but a group of anti-abortion medical providers and a dentist and a pro-life dentist filed a case in Texas under a judge that they knew hated abortion, literally spent his whole life as an anti-abortion attorney, was like in the firm that protected the 50-yard line coach who wanted to pray, like that kind of shit.
Wow, is he really? Yeah.
Every baker who hates gay people, I think they represent every baker. Like they're just that gang. Then he gets picked by Trump, plopped into Amarillo, Texas, decides this case, which they were bringing the case saying that the FDA rushed to judgment. They rushed to the market, the abortion pill. I'm going to give you a quiz, Pete. So the abortion pill was 1988 in Europe, put on the market. 12 years later, came to the United States, was on the market in the United States. We did 4 years of study from 2000 till now. about 5.2 million people have used the abortion pill. Pete, how many cases do you think, like 5.2 million, how many cases do you think ended in death from using the abortion pill?
Well, I bet you have millions of abortions, but that's
Fair.
not. And they think that that's death of the baby, right? They're going to say that. That's what they're going to say.
Let's not go with them. Let's go with what how many people do you think?
How many women died using that pill?
Yeah. In 5.2 million, how many do you think they use?
I don't know the answer. I just know it's far fewer than so many other drugs like Viagra and Advil that are on the market. That I do know, but I don't know. 10? 5? 10?
25.
How many?
People. 25.
25 people died?
25 people. And they say complications associated with.
Right.
So it's not even this definitive line.
Right.
So in 5.2 million people, 25 people wound up dead in some fashion because of the abortion. There is no drug on the market that gives you that kind of odds. And just to give you an idea of, 88 goes on the market in Europe, 4-year study here goes on the market here, right? Viagra from patent to market, 2 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And so these lawyers are arguing that they're going to experience profound harm because this drug was rushed to the market. And because the FDA expanded dispensing of the pill through the mail, that is going to cause a wave of patients, for some unknown reason, are all of a sudden going to be experiencing terrible side effects from taking the abortion pill. And then here's the part that you have to be a nut to believe. This wave of horrible side effects are going to happen. And then those who have experienced the side effects are going to seek out the anti-abortion doctor who would like to put them in jail for taking the pill. So this is what they've claimed. And the dentist. And I'm like, honey, ain't nobody going to an anti-abortion dentist if they are having abortion pill complications. I know you work in cavities. I think you're a little misguided.
Well, what is the current legal state? The Fifth Circuit fears the Supreme Court.
The Fifth Circuit heard the case in their arguments, and this was really great, and this needs to be put out to the world. So the plaintiffs bringing this forth had to prove 3 things to the Fifth Circuit. 1, that they would be overwhelmingly harmed because abortion pills are being mailed. No, that I've just told you no. B, they've said that they have had to treat people who've taken the abortion pill and had to provide abortions, but they had to prove that somebody didn't allow them to enact their conscience clause and that they were forced to do it. Never proved it, never even claimed that was the case. And lastly, the 3 cases that they cited in their argument were all pills that were procured from India. So none of those pills even went through the FDA.
Wow.
Yes. And that's the stuff that, like, if you listen to my podcast, you can actually go. We did a special episode with a reproductive attorney just on laying out the case. And the judges were, clearly on the side of Josh Hawley's wife. And it was really depressing. I mean, Matthew Ho, one of the judges hearing this case, was on record saying that abortion is a moral failing of America. It's a mess. So it's sitting now. The Fifth Circuit is going to mull it over, and they're going to decide whether or not these people have standing and if they should force medication abortion to go back through more rigorous testing. And also, right now, the FDA has said you can take it up to 10 weeks. When it came onto the market, it was 7 weeks. So they might roll it back to 7 weeks, which again, who knows they're pregnant. They may force it to go back to in-person dispensing of a pill, which you don't need that. And a whole lot of other monstrous shit. And then go through a whole bunch of process again. So they could rule that. Either way, when the Fifth Circuit throws its ruling down, it's going to the Supreme Court. Just know that to be a true thing. And then this fantastic Supreme Court will decide. Now, the interesting thing in all of this is where I have hope.
Well, good.
The makers of mifepristone is the drug we've been talking about. Mm-hmm. It's the generic name for Mifeprex, which is the pill that RU-486. So the manufacturer of mifepristone, their attorney spoke, right? And laid a very compelling case that if they stop this drug, they will go out of business, right? And so there's nothing the Supreme Court loves more than making sure a corporation stays open. So I don't know that even this Supreme Court would put a company out of business based on a bunch of bullshit. But who knows? I can't say, because these are not good times or normal times or times where people look at the Constitution. So it's a mess.
And they're not stopping at... I feel like
I'm filibustering.
They're not. No, they're fine. They're not stopping at abortion access or the pills. I mean, they've come for sex education, as you mentioned earlier. They're coming for IVF. They're making it as hard as possible for you to prevent. I was talking about this with somebody recently. We're not even talking about terminating a pregnancy. Now we're also talking about preventing conception, condoms, IVF. I mean, where does it end? The answer I know is it doesn't, because the anti-abortion activists are pretty open. But what is, do you think, the strategy as we see right now with the anti-abortion activists as to what's next? I mean, they've got the whole Southeast, it would seem.
Well, I think the what's next is a total ban on abortion. Mm-hmm. A federal ban on abortion.
That'll be the issue in this election, right? Like, for the Republican is going to have to, whoever the nominee is, most likely Trump, but they're going to have to say where they would stand on a national ban.
Yes. And also, I think people need to understand a trend that is now bubbling up, which is, since they've seen the abject failure of abortion bans, people actually like abortion polls better than every politician.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So what they're doing now is they're marrying anti-trans bills that involve kids and abortion bans so that they can get people to vote on the abortion ban. And so the combo platter, it's the same hate. I mean, the hatred is very intersectional. We need to be better at being intersectional because, man, these haters, they are all the same fucking people. And the clinics that they're closing are also the same clinics that are providing low-income trans care as well, right? And so it's a double whammy. And that's a big trend that we're going to be seeing. I also think that birth control, I mean, there was leaked audio in Tennessee talking about IVF and saying, you know what, don't mention IVF, but let's slide this shit in. How do we frame it around that, right? So it's a worldview of reproduction that is based in Christian extremism. And it is terrifying to see how much control they have when they are the minority. This just shows you what gerrymandering does. And also we need an education plan too, because as we saw, like, it was really exciting, right? You remember last year when we watched Kansas, the state of Kansas overwhelmingly vote for codifying abortion in their state. By the same token, Republicans who had proposed and or passed these bills were voted back in. So people aren't even making the connection as to who are the people creating these laws, and we need to get rid of them, as well as making sure that abortion access is going to be available in the states that we live in.
I feel like what I've seen, I pay pretty close attention to all these different progressive organizations that try to help progressives, especially women, get elected, that not only are people waking up in terms of how they're going to vote and becoming active in the political process, a lot of people are running on this issue as motivated by this issue. Are you seeing a lot of young people who are running for office at any different level because of women's reproductive rights being so under threat?
I am. And what I am seeing too, and this is a really big piece of how politicians, but also how us can affect things. People used to run away from abortion. Progressives, Democrats, right? People need to not only run on this issue, but they have to run to say, I'm going to expand access to abortion. It's not enough to beat shit back. You have to expand it. And we all need to talk about it and normalize it and recenter abortion, birth control, IVF, trans care, all of it, recenter it into the healthcare conversation about healthcare somebody might need in their lifetime. You know, if the statistic is 1 in 4 women will have an abortion during her reproductive life, that is a lot of people who are finding themselves pregnant with valid reasons to not want to be pregnant anymore. Right.
Yeah.
And we need to honor that. And we need to talk about it without shame.
Yeah.
We need to not always center the cases that are incredibly heartbreaking and tragic. Nobody wants to hear about an 11-year-old who can't get an abortion in Ohio and has to travel to Indiana. That's fucking awful. But you know what else is awful? Any other person who is assessing their life, their mental health, the way that they are, who simply can't have another kid, is not capable of having children. Honoring that in the same way is where we need to get.
Yeah, no, it's such a good point. You have talked about abortion using language that helps reframe it and helps take away the stigma and I think alleviate the shame that so many people have talking about it, much less having one. You wrote about your own and your amazing book. I probably mention it every time you're here. Liz Free or Die, isn't that the name of the book?
It is.
And I think it's a really good point on the abortion issue and the same on like the gun issue. We don't need to look just at the mass shooting and at the most horrific of crimes. We don't need to just look at the most horrific circumstances. We need to realize that the damage that this is doing in so many other ways, short of death, short of permanent damage, it is really problematic, to be nice, and if not terribly inconvenient and life-altering, you know, in so many different ways. And for what? And for what? That's the thing. Like, if we're going to create new laws that might be problematic or life-altering, they should be because they're doing something for the greater good. So the question is you're causing so much pain and damage, and for what? And we need to focus on those stories as well as the big headlines that we hear about, you know, a child being raped. Of course, we should agree on that. I think that's what you're saying.
100%. And I think, Pete, in so many of these issues, guns, abortion, we've run away from our moral ground of how we feel about it because we're trying to appease a false other side, right? That's never happening. And and especially when it comes to abortion, the other side can win every time. If you don't say the word, how do you defend it? And the other side can say, you won't say abortion. You'll say pro-choice. You'll say women's reproductive rights. You'll say all this stuff. Like, you won't even say it. So why should anybody be listening to you? Because you have shame about it.
Right.
Why are you ashamed? And so part of the big thing that we do at Abortion Access Front is to really just start that conversation and sort of challenge folks to say, we've been talking this way for a long time. Yeah. Did we ever stop to think about why we're saying that, or why we decided to say those things, or say no one's for abortion? I'm super for abortion. Like, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, because it wasn't our morals that dictated it to us.
Right.
It was us trying to win at a respectability game that ain't happening. And quite frankly, Pete, I'm sick of bringing a PowerPoint presentation to a knife fight. I just won't do it anymore. Yeah, because we're in a knife fight.
They are in the mainstream of the Republican Party in Congress. They are asking witnesses, expert witnesses, including doctors who have performed abortions, who have been dealing with women's reproductive rights their whole career. You know, where do you stand on murdering a baby that was just born? Like, that's where they're at. So we need to greet them and meet them at a more honest place, because that's not a thing, and it's a horrible thing to ask. And yet that's their window now. That's the Overton window has changed to, you're killing live babies. And we're like, I feel like we'll always be kind of reacting. And I think to some extent that's okay, because we don't think that they're going to say or believe or do these crazy things, so we don't have time to prepare against them all the time. But in this case, it's like, what are you supposed to say to that? What do you possibly...
I'll tell you what you say to that. Here's what you say to that. What you say to that is the cruelty with which you would reframe palliative care for people who have seconds, minutes, hours with a child that they had, that they knew was not going to exist. For you to reframe that into something else is one of the cruelest things I've ever heard. And you, I hope, never have to experience that, because that is one of the hardest things that any parent will do. And fuck you, because that is what they're talking about.
And also go fuck yourself.
Also, Tim Scott, just declared he's running for president. Last year, his hot take was that the Democrats were supporting abortion up to 52 weeks of pregnancy. Oh,
is that a giraffe, I think, gestational period?
Last I Googled, that is...
I believe he's referring, in his defense, I believe he was referring to giraffes.
Could be. Which, those giraffes are just like abortion-loving,
yes,
long-legged whores.
Giraffes are such whores.
Whores.
I knew we would get into the whoring of giraffes, and I'm glad
giraffes
that we finally...
slutty verse of the in the animal kingdom. Like you spread the legs, you're taking out 17 lions. I don't know what happens. It's a spam.
Liz, I'll let you go, but I want to talk to you about everything else in life and politics in the world, and not only the issue that you are the best at, women's reproductive rights. So let's do that soon and continue, obviously, to talk about this.
I'll talk about anything. You know me. I can talk about anything.
Been way too long, and you're so good at it. Abortion Access Front, everybody. All the links. Go see her and the gang in New York for a live taping.
Come to our podcast. It's going to be so fun.
June 7th in New York, and then July 20th in Atlanta, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been way too long. Let's do it again real soon.
Oh, my God. Real soon, friend. Thank you.
All right, there she goes, Lizz Winstead. Go on to Twitter right now and tell her you heard her here and you appreciate her joining me, as well as Dahlia Lithwick, who is so good. Both these women, amazing on one show. How about it? Who am I? How do I get so lucky? Dahlia Lithwick, Lizz Winstead, and you. Can't do it without you. And so I hope to see you tonight at the Hangout. We do it every Thursday night at 8 p.m. If you're a stand-up subscriber, if you're not, go sign up. What are you waiting for? Patreon.com/Pete